Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Ibiwaye and I am so delighted to be your moderator for today. Yesterday I was very honored to moderate the global knowledge sharing session, and we had three amazing speakers, including a policy advisor from UNESCO, and today I would briefly highlight the outcome of that session and we would move on right into the research to action segment. The session focused on the perception of students and teachers on the impact of COVID-19 on access and quality of learning in higher education. Some of the issues raised was the alarming gender biases on access to internet services, especially in rural and marginalized areas. Also, another issue that was raised was on students and teachers' mental health affection. We talked about the psychological issues, anxiety, loneliness, the fact that there can be no connection with peers and teachers, and also the school disruption risk. Three recommendations came out from the researchers, and the first was on the technological gap. The researchers shared that there is need for financial assistance for internet device access. Another recommendation under the technological gap was also the need to decentralize resources to rural and marginalized communities. Another recommendation was on well-being. The researchers talked about the need to train teachers and parents to use devices and learning platforms to integrate social aspects in the teaching curriculum. We also talked about the need to develop well-being care by providing students with access to platforms such as telemedicine, psychology, and psychiatry. The final recommendation that came out from this report was on transformation, the need to develop and sustain a hybrid education method. A researcher said that the future of learning would be both online and also in person. We cannot rule out the social, emotional aspect of learning. The researchers also shared about creating customized education platforms that provide students with devices and capabilities to learn at their own pace. We got a number of feedback from the advisor, Mr. Vladimir Sucha, who is a policy advisor at UNESCO, and he highlighted the importance of listening and engaging with young people in this changing and transforming world by contributing to research and policy recommendations. Mr. Vladimir also congratulated the participants on the pertinent issues that were raised, especially on well-being and mental health. He also mentioned that there was a need to be, this is something that needs to be particularly addressed in today's changing world where we have artificial intelligence and digital media. There was an agreement that the technological gap is the second strongest challenge to prioritize as a global community. And he also welcomed the idea of hybrid curriculums to strengthen higher education, encouraging teachers and students to develop soft skills. Some of the questions that were raised during the session yesterday were, how can the youth as researchers possibly collect data from other organizations to strengthen the current data that was shared, and also to benefit policy recommendations that would be shared during the December global meeting. Another question was, how do we address the impact of online learning in smaller universities that have less capacities than the bigger ones? And finally, another question was, how do we translate these research findings into action? The main outcomes that came out of our deliberations yesterday from the experts and researchers are that teachers and students' well-being and technological gaps are the two main issues to address as priorities for small island development countries. We also talked about having room for innovation. Hybrid education is here to stay. Hybrid education, while developing independence and soft skills for teachers and students, this allows for smaller groups to learn. It is financially more accessible. It works with time scheduling. It's more flexible, and it has lesser accessibility issues. the youth demonstrated capacity to collect and analyze the data and research, testifying that young people are actionable. And also an issue was, how do we explore young people as counselors to tailor the future of higher education? Finally, there was a universal agreement to deepen the research that was shared yesterday and to explore new data, for example, on the aspect of social workers, and to have stronger material to debate at the December conference. So this is just a very brief summary of how the session went yesterday. We will now go on to introduce our panelists today, but before I do that, I want to announce to the young researchers and young people who are in the audience that if you would like to ask a question to the panelists, you have the option of raising your hand and also writing in the chat function your name and the question that you would like to address to the panelists. Today, we will be having a fishbowl discussion, and how this works is that the conversation stays within the circle. So just try to imagine an imaginary circle that we are all seated around the table. The panelists would give an insight, then we would open up the conversation to others who are outside of the circle to ask questions or just to add to the conversation. Briefly, I will introduce our panelists and I'll give each panelist the floor to share a remark based on the summary that I have just shared. Our first panelist is Professor Gina El-Feki, who is the Supervisor of Scientific and Cultural Relations at ASRT, the Academic of Scientific Research and Technology in Egypt. We are also pleased today to have Ms. Aisha Razak, who is the Technical Advisor of the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training in Pakistan. We also have here with us today Mr. Anase Bolhal, who is coming from the Section for Higher Education at the education sector at UNESCO. We also have with us Dr. Stephen Sevali, who is from the NACO Veric at Sierra Leone. And finally, just like yesterday, we have also with us Mr. Vladimir Suchak, who is a UNESCO advisor from the Social and Human Sector Sciences. So I will give the floor in the order that the names were presented, and the first panelist will be Professor Gina El-Feki. You may take the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you for your introduction, and thank you for briefing about yesterday's meeting that unfortunately I missed, but actually you gave a very detailed and understandable brief about what happened yesterday. So actually, let me say, and I think we all agree that the topic raised for this global session is very important. The effect of pandemic on the quality of education, the transmitting to digital learning, hybrid learning, making massive changes in the methods and the modes of education. So I think this is a very important topic, and actually I've been witnessing these transformations and the effects of what happened during the pandemic on education from three different aspects. Let me say that three sides of a triangle, because as a professor at the university, I've witnessed the difficulties of communicating with children and setting modules that are capable of delivering a good quality of education to the students and keeping the pace and the communications running with the student. This was very, very difficult, especially that not every one of the professors teaching at the university was capable of handling the new perspectives and was capable of using the new tools of communication. So this was one aspect. The other aspect, as a mother of two children, one of which at the university, and how they were a little bit lost, especially at the beginning of the process, because actually it's not the best thing to keep putting your eyes or looking at the screen for 2 to 3 hours, maybe for more even, and keeping your concentration, keeping your level of concentration. Well, this was very difficult. Sometimes I saw them just opening their cameras or shutting off their cameras and opening their mics, or shutting off their mics and just going to sleep. So this was another perspective. And the other perspective was being involved in the science, technology, and innovation strategy at the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, and watching how the government was trying to go through specific policies, regulations, and guidelines in order to make sure that they are controlling the process of education and they are managing the links and the bridges between the universities and the students along a number of policies. So I think this topic is a very important topic. I think it's very important to have our discussions today to listen to your vision, to listen to the outputs of the research you've done, to listen to what's going on your heads regarding this. I think you would have many concerns and many questions of the future, and I think it would be very interesting to have your most of your questions answered. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gina. I will now give the floor to our next panelist, Ms. Aisha Razak from Pakistan.
Hi, thank you so much. It's a wonderful session. I think for me, it's a particularly interesting, exciting session because I mean, after a very long time, I've come to a session where it's not a conversation just between. It's not an echo chamber where the same adults doing the same kind of work for the past 10, 15, 20 years are basically sitting in an echo chamber and saying the same things over and over. I think the most refreshing part of this session and this research that you're bringing, you're highlighting in these sessions is the fact that the population that was most affected, I think, in this pandemic, their voices, you're bringing their voices to the fore. The fact that they were empowered to do this research, analyze their own problems, come up with their own solutions. I mean, one, yes, they are bringing forth the problems that the policymakers, the practitioners, and the adults should look at, but they are also becoming a part of the solution, which I think going forward, not just for the pandemic issue, not just for the education issue, but looking at the world that we are going to enter and have already entered with so much uncertainty and all kinds of disasters in the making for us, including the climate change disaster, which is going to have its own impact on education and education disruption because of various reasons. I think this is a great start. I think the youth of today is going to be the decision maker of tomorrow, and if you're engaging them in this process of identifying issues but also coming up with their own solutions, I think it's a great thing. I think the pandemic has been extremely debilitating for both adults and the youth. And by the way, I'm not just a technical advisor to the policymakers. I'm also a mother. My daughter was in the last 1.5 years completing her high school education. So she, was in the middle of grade 11 when this happened, and she graduated from grade 12, now a freshwoman, and went through similar issues. So I also know from a parent's perspective how difficult it was for my child, how difficult it was for me as a parent to engage in very different ways with her education. And then also, so this was the individual side of things, but then also looking at from a policy perspective, sitting at the ministry level and trying to find a solution for all children, which is honestly I mean, it's extremely difficult because, I mean, just look at the number of children. Look at the fact that the children that we're talking about today, it's not a homogeneous group. I'm sure when you did your research, you must have figured that there are various subpopulations within this population. There are those that you are calling, who were probably a little more privileged in the sense that they had better access. Then there were some that did not have, access which was as great. And then there was, there were others that we like to call marginalized communities, which maybe did not have access at all. So there is survey data, there is research data that's come out in the past 1 year from Pakistan, Pakistan that suggests that a number of children just did not have access at all. And it was, in some places connectivity issues, and we are going to continue to have those issues in the coming years. Unfortunately, there were children who did not have access to, the right software, the right hardware. And so that was another level of an issue. We keep talking about the gender disparity in access to, online education. But remember, when we talk about, it's not just the gender divide, it's also the fact that, maybe children with special needs were left behind even more. There are certain other communities that were left behind even more because of, other restraints, because of where they're located or the kinds of, backgrounds they come from, et cetera, et cetera. I think parents, so I'm not going to go into, some other points. I'm going to keep them for the rest of the conversation. And I know that some of the other speakers would like to, maybe make the same points also, but what I do want to highlight here, and then maybe stop before I get another chance to speak, is the fact that I think, so there were, this side where there were so many problems for everyone, for the teachers, for the administrators, for parents, for children. But then look at what you have learned about, because looking at my own daughter also, look at what you have learned about yourself. I mean, the situation, I'm not making it as simple as that. The situation might have been very, very different for some children than it was for my daughter. But look at what you have learned about yourself. I mean, I know how this transformed for example, my child. You become, and some of the other children, because we work in that field, you just became more independent. You became more self-aware of where your shortcomings are, where your weaknesses are, and where your strengths lie. I mean, if this research was done by the youth, and the group that you followed lies between 15 to 18 years of age, yes, there were problems, but imagine the kind of strengths that you displayed, and those are strengths that you need to identify and build on, but also weaknesses. Taking charge of your own learning at this point, at 15 to 18 years old, in a lot of ways you're already responsible, because you're very close to entering a very different stage in your life, which is your university education. So taking charge of and taking responsibility of your own education and reaching out where you need help, I think that's also something that we need to keep to the fore and reflect on. So I hope I made sense. There were many things I wanted to say, but I'll wait for my next turn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aisha. Something that you mentioned that Professor El-Feki also said was the fact that both of you are mothers. So you have young children who are being affected, you're educators, you wear so many hats, and being able to bring that perspective to this discussion, I think it's very needed. I will now move on to Mr. Anase for your remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Olivia, for this kind invitation, and I'm really pleased to join this session. And I also would like to congratulate you for selecting this topic, which is still timely topic. Even we are seeing some lights in the tunnel of the post-COVID-19 in some regions, of course. But I think this is very good topic to continue talking and debating on it. If the previous speakers were mothers, I'm also a father, and I have kids in the school, and myself, I've been in the university for many years, so I'm talking about the things which I live with. It's not only from the theoretical or the planning perspective as my job, but also as an end user, and also as every citizen in this global area where we are all connected. I will also join my colleague, Mr. Vladimir, on his thoughts on engaging student or learner with teacher. I think is a very good thing, and I think in many previous seminars and those, I think learners haven't been, or the learner's voice wasn't taken into consideration so much. And I think this is, if I may say, this is novelty, or this is a really good argument in this conference or this session of today. I don't know if I will have time or more to talk about this the other things later on, but just following the discussion of what the colleagues had started, I think COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that no education system in the world is resilient to crisis. This is I think becoming really clear, even in Europe, US, in highly developed countries or less developed regions, and I think it shows that no education system is resilient to the crisis. Especially when we're talking about the higher education institutions, haven't been not an exception at all. So I think it's important to underline this the temporary closures of higher education institutions due to COVID-19 pandemic are no longer news as we know. So because most countries had stopped or interrupted, because stopping or interrupting is different. There are some countries or universities are arguing that learning never stops, even they tried even to provide with the learning facilities in different way. But as even with all those innovation in technologies, we analyzed the situation and we could conclude on what have been said before too. That's the issue of equity in access to online learning has been an issue. But I go even more wider than that. And I think it's not only the access to online learning, but access to well quality online learning. So I think the quality element hasn't been raised in discussion yet, but I think this is a part where we need to see how we could discuss the involvement of the quality assurance system. The players in education have been involved in making an evaluation of the learning outcomes, which has been promised to the learner, but I don't know if this is a question mark. Have we achieved the learning outcomes, or we do have some learning losses while we've been in the COVID-19 situation? I will not, I think still have a lot of things to talk about. The recognition of online learning is an issue in many countries. So I think I'm talking from the global point of view. I'm not talking on a specific region. So I think the recognition on online learning has been an issue yet for many countries in different region. On last not the least, the teacher preparedness has been since we are including today in our session, the perception of students and teachers, and I think the teachers preparedness has been a big issue in terms of pedagogy, engineer pedagogy, and so on. So I think I will stop here. I will give slot to the other colleagues, and we'll be continuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anas. I will now move on to Dr. Stephen Sevali from Sierra Leone.
Yeah. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. So I am coming from a point where I have been involved in the national COVID-19 response and involved in crafting some of the policies to manage the environment. And as you rightly mentioned, Victoria, thanks for the summary that you provided. And absolutely correct, there has been acute disruption in educational activities at many levels with impact on students as well as teachers. And of course, the psychosocial impact, I feel, is serious. We know that youth and children need an environment of interaction, and that deprivation sustained over a long period of time, we may not be sure how it really affects growth, psychosocial growth and development. I think all these points have been made, and what really I will maybe spend a little bit more time on is the opportunities that technology provides, but also its limitations. We have been forced to shift to the idea of online learning, which is is really good, and probably that is the only thing we have to deal with. But that also exposes some of the economic and social disparities that exist in society, because access to technology is, especially if you live in low socioeconomic areas, is not that easily accessible. And I will give you an example. My daughter started high school, and she was able to attend a high-end school, and therefore they started off with some online learning sessions. But then most school will not be able to afford that. But also most children, most youths will not be able to access such a platform. So as much as technology provides an opportunity, but it also exposes some of the economic and social disparities in society, and those are limitations. And of course, the next thing it also points out as we fight to craft policies is, what age are we talking about? Of course, youths fall within, an age span, and technology use and the amount of commitment and concentration that is required is not the same for all age categories. And that also brings additional challenges. Of course, the opportunity I have seen is that it has forced penetration of technology in society. I think we are more receptive to online learning. For example, having a meeting like this was not a commonplace, probably before COVID-19 pandemic. But now I think we are getting accustomed to the idea that we have to adopt technology, we have to go online, and we have to make use of the opportunities that technological platforms can create. I will also mention the point that since epidemics and pandemics is likely going to be the challenge for humankind in now and the immediate future. I am saying this is because I am in Sierra Leone, West Africa. In 2013 to 2015, we dealt with the Ebola epidemic. Well, almost a pandemic, because most of West Africa was affected. And we know how much, for example, youth lost in terms of educational opportunities, because schools and colleges were closed for almost close to 2 years. And now we are dealing with COVID-19. We don't know what is going to come in the future. But then I think we have to seriously think about how do we craft educational platform. What ways do we set learning environment to be able to cater for the possibilities of epidemics and pandemics? I will stop here for now. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen. As Mr. Bola rightly said, that no education system is resilient to crisis, and that with the new normal that we are in right now, we need to be discussing about equity and access to quality online learning. I really appreciate how much you also emphasized that we can look at the silver lining. The past year has posed lots of challenges to our education system, but there are also opportunities, and we need to be preparing today for the uncertain future. Thank you so much for perfectly highlighting all those points in such a brief time. We will now move to our final panelist today, Mr. Vladimir Sucha, also from UNESCO.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria, and hello, good afternoon from Paris time to all other panelists and those participating in this workshop. I had the privilege to be and participate and comment on excellent research work done by colleagues, and I saw the faces, known faces of Smriti and Fauzia, and I don't know if the others are as well connected. And I must say, as I said, as I concluded yesterday, that was fascinating to listen to very pertinent and high quality outcomes they reached in their own, I would say, engagement. And here I am with first message, and that's engagement. This is what Victoria, you you very well concluded yesterday. For me, the engagement, and here we are talking in this session from research to policy, how to translate something from research to policy. And well, that was my bread and butter for many years in the European Commission, where I'm working, and I'm here the visitor to UNESCO for a moment. I was leading big organization which was producing the evidence for European Union decision and policy making. So that was our daily bread and butter. And one of the conclusions is that we have to engage citizens if we want, because ahead of us, and you mentioned, and we witnessed this during the COVID, the governments were facing tough decisions, not always with the full support of their citizens. And this is going to continue. So we are not at the end of this evolution. We are going to have challenges of artificial intelligence. We are going to have ahead of us challenges of climate crisis. And the decisions about reducing the traffic, imposing some tariffs on CO2, or regulating different social platforms, etc. These are not easy decisions. So, and here, the only way how to proceed and how to be successful is to have alliances, is to engage people, engage citizens in those decisions. And then if students, for example, as in this research, they conclude something, they are, I'm sure they are already convinced that these are good conclusions and important aspects for decision makers. So then we do not need to convince them. So then the policy making must leave the ivory tower, as well as research must leave the ivory tower of ministries or parliaments or whatever decision bodies, or research must leave the exclusive elite laboratories, universities, and work with people. So that, for me, this engagement is, it was not Fauzia in your explicit results, but I take it as an implicit result of your research, an implicit result of entire youth as researcher, I would say, endeavor, because this is testing how we are able to engage, in this case, young people, but we should not forget about the older people as well, that we need to involve them as well in the decision making. Then I agree with many of you. You mentioned this global impact. I think that the COVID, but also the results of research were showing that we are not that different. That, you know, very rich countries, poor countries, from the point of GDP. I think that if you look at the country from the point of view of resilience, that's another point. And here in UNESCO, there is a fantastic program, which is not that well known, which is called the Management of Societal Transformation. But from my perspective, this program should become a cornerstone in the future development, because we have nothing ahead of us, just the transformation of society. The COVID already transformed the society significantly within few months, and artificial intelligence will transform society more in 10 years than in 1,000 years before. So it's something which is ahead of us, and we need to have this kind of global sense that these issues, obviously the technological gap, obviously money is playing the role, but actually, as Anas, you said, that the education, none of the education systems is resilient enough or was resilient enough to do this. And I think this is exactly what is happening, and what we should be learning, that we should be also looking for the global solutions, and we should have this global cooperation to solve big issues. And I agree with everything what was said, that there are many positive sides of COVID. And of course, there are horrible sides, and people are dying and people are suffering. But as every crisis, we have been able to learn a lot and transform the society and education system in a way we would not do without this push coming from COVID. And that's this digital translation, digital transition. And we see that even this event, otherwise in other days, we would bring all those people maybe to Paris and to talk about that, and then the carbon footprint and the time spent. Obviously, we are missing this social interaction and this dimension. But okay, that from time to time we can have this, but in many cases we can perfectly do these kind of events online with low cost and with very high flexibility and capacity to engage many people from many different regions. And here I am with the soft skills. If there is one issue ahead of us, is not the facts which we need to be learning as it was the case of education of 19th century and the 20th century. I think that educational systems should be strengthening and developing socio-emotional skills in the next generations, but also in adult people during the lifelong learning. And this is the most important part, where the COVID was teaching us a very tough lesson in this respect. And actually, implicitly, we did this because this kind of, as some of you mentioned, this kind of independence, taking responsibility for our own decision, or the kids' own decision, the students' own decisions. I think this is very important important aspect, that the education does not need to be paternalistic. We don't need to have the almighty teacher who knows everything and he's just giving this knowledge to kids. No, the situation is much more equal. The kids have access to knowledge. The knowledge is not an issue in most cases. What is an issue is how to navigate, how to think critically, how to evaluate, how to learn, etc., etc. And here we need to just switch this kind of teacher-centric centric approach to student-centric system of education. And again, I see this as a result of this research. Obviously, we have to have in mind marginalized communities. I think, and here again, maybe there are more in the global south of this marginalized community, but there are many in the global north as well. And this is something where we need to, and I think this is, I take it as a very serious lesson, that we need to engage and involve and close this technological gap. And it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive because these technologies, this is not the rocket technologies. This is the prices are very cheap. So I think that we need to find solutions. And for me, I must say that the lesson I learned from yesterday and from all this is that these three students, and I think that Cezanne is a teacher, she said, but anyway, very young person. They are absolutely equal partners for policymakers. They are able to formulate very well the lessons, conclusions with very important policy dimensions. So I think that we need to open up the policy making much more to this kind of interactions. And I'm confident that if we are aiming in December event to have this kind of policy debate, that I'm afraid that Fauzia, you and your colleagues will be probably better equipped than some of policymakers at a very high level. So, and you will be able to engage in this kind of debate much better than some ministers I had the pleasure to meet. So then I think this is very encouraging that you're able to go ahead in this respect. So they are just a few reflections on yesterday and today's panel, and so it's once again, many thanks for having this opportunity to be with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vladimir. I think that you really brought together the pieces of what the panelists before you have said, and you've woven that into the conversation for today. Today's discussion really is about everything that the youth as researchers have been working on. How do we bring all of that from research to action? And one thing that I got from what you shared today is about engagement. You said that we need to have alliances to engage citizens in decision-making. And also what I see from today's discourse is not only do we have the young people who participated in the research, we also have someone from the academia, someone from government, someone from the health sector. So that shows that when it comes to education system, no one institution or one group can function alone. We all need each other. We need to rub minds together. We need to exchange our knowledge and experiences. And that now brings us to the fishbowl discussion. I believe we have Fauzia and also Smithry here, but I will give the floor first to Fauzia and Smithry. And I also want to remind everyone, if you have a question to our panelists or to the fishbowl participants, feel free to use the raise hand function on Zoom, or you could also write in the chat function. Over to you, Fauzia.
Hello, everyone. Much appreciated and much humbled to be present here with the esteemed panelists. And I am Fauzia Reza, and I am a research student with Japanese government scholarship at Nagoya University. First, thank you to Mr. Vladimir Shucha for all the appreciation of the previous session. I know that our key recommendations have already been mentioned. So one of the things that we want to draw your attention to again, and our question basically is to Mr. Anas Bohlal, but all the panelists can chime in as well. Please feel free. So as part of our survey, we asked the respondents, what are other concerns you would like to share besides those about access and quality? We did receive a big number of responses talking about the effect of pandemic on their mental health. We were surprised by the responses the respondents came up with, like they were feeling stressed, they cannot concentrate. The teachers mentioning that I think I'm more than a teacher now. Things like that also coincides with the other country-specific data that our team found during the research review, desk review, I mean. So for example, in case of Bangladesh, if you allow me to share a trigger warning a finding that says that from the onset of COVID, after the passing of 1 year, they found out that there were 70% more deaths due to suicide than due to COVID. And half of the suicide victims were in the age group of 20 to 35. So I'm sure if we look for more data and if it is available, there will be more alarming notes like that. But the thing with mental health situation is there is not enough data available. For some countries, especially in the global south, mental health also comes with stigma, and as many stereotypes are available, and it's very difficult to have these discussions, and there is not enough capacity as well. We don't have enough psychiatrists, we don't have enough psychologists to respond to this situation. So how can we go about asking the governments to introduce compulsory courses on mental health, well-being, and stress management?
Wow, thank you very much, Fauzia. That's a powerful question that you've asked. I will now move on to Smithry, and after which open the floor to any of the panelists, to react after the second speaker has spoken. Over to you, Smithry.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
Thank you for everybody for giving us the opportunity to be here and ask these questions. My question is to Dr. Aisha, and obviously all other panelists also please free to contribute. In tandem to our findings and our recommendations about extending financial assistance or subsidies for internet connectivity, for example, for either internet connection or internet devices, especially focusing to the marginalized or the female students. We are well aware that this would cause a financial burden to the government, especially in the global south. How do you think is the best possible way to pitch this to the government to get their attention more? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. Would any of the panelists like to take the floor? Maybe use the raise hand function so we are not talking over each other. Yes, please, Dr. Aisha, you may take the floor.
Hi. Yes, I'll respond to the second question first because it was asked directly. And thank you very much for, there's no easy answer to be very honest. I do want to mention here that I think, so a lot of governments, including the government in Pakistan, has been for several years now cognizant of the fact that, the digital transformation or whatever you may want to call it is something that they need to take seriously. And so in Pakistan, we have 4 provinces in a federal capital territory. We don't have a national system of education per se. Education in Pakistan is a devolved subject, which means that every province or 2 of the independent sort of self-autonomous, self-administering states are responsible for their own education delivery. So over the past few years, these different federating units have been on the path to transforming their or changing their education system and taking it more along the lines of, let's keep adding technology when it comes to the education of student, or when it comes to the professional development of teachers. Let's try out new ways. Let's try out more cost-effective ways, which are also scalable. And of course, when you think about doing something on scale and doing it, with some certain minimum standard of quality, you think that technology is one tool that can take you towards that end. So there has been a recognition. I think the pandemic, what this really drove home, at least with policymakers here in Pakistan, is that transformation needs to happen faster than we thought earlier. We have recognized that the ideal scenario where everyone has connectivity and where everyone has devices is going to still take time, but there are things that we can do in the short term and things that we can do in the medium term that can lead us to that end. So we are working, for instance in Pakistan with several I would say domestic, but also international partners, and doing things. For instance, we are mapping areas where we are mapping connectivity in the country. So we are, I think, the very first step, and we realized last year that we don't even know the areas where we have good connectivity, or connectivity that is going to make it possible for us to deliver the kind of education that we want to deliver in a situation like this. So that was the first thing. The other thing is then also doing a need assessment of what kind of equipment, for example, or what kind of receiver end trainings or software or hardware is it that you're going to need to provide to the schools? What is it that you're going to need to provide to the child, him or herself, because they are not all the time going to be able to access through school. They may not, in the case of school closures, they may need to access from home. So every individual is going to then need a device. So those kinds of mappings are happening as we speak. I think in some cases in Pakistan, like in many other countries, there's a lot of socioeconomic disparity among populations. There were some populations, there were some schools, albeit the numbers were really small, where the access was pretty good. The connectivity, people are, are able to buy privately the connectivity or the hardware or the software required. So those people, I would, say that will continue to buy it. But then there are communities of teachers and students who are not going to be able to do it themselves. So in certain cases, and it's a tricky question, to be very honest, I don't want to say all the answers that are going to appear very correct to you and are good to hear. I think providing every child with a device or every teacher with a device is still a very, I know the speaker before me said that this is something that's not as expensive. This is something that's becoming cheaper with the time. And maybe it's true for certain contexts. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if it's 100% correct for some of the contexts that we are dealing with. And I understand that there's a lot of mismanagement when it comes to finances and the way that development projects are thought in many countries, including here in Pakistan. Even when money is available, the way it's spent and whether it's spent cost effectively or on things on which it should be spent, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. But even that said, I'm not entirely sure if this is as cheap as we like to think it is, also considering the fact that it's not a one-time cost that you need to incur. It's something that's a recurrent cost, especially when it comes to the hardware and the software. So I do see in the near and in the medium term future, and I think we should definitely strive for that, for that sweet spot where, hybrid education might be a possibility. And then also when we talk about technology, it's not just the high-end technology that we need to invest in to make some of these things happen. There are also things that people are doing with cheaper technology. So when you say devices and when you say connectivity and devices, a lot of times people think that that's giving each child a tablet or each child a computer, and then and that may not be a possibility in the short term. But there are cost-effective ways in which practitioners and research have experimented over the past year and a half. They have found solutions that are in between, where there is a hybrid system, face-to-face, where it's necessary and where technology is just not available, but then also complementing pieces of it which can be cost effectively brought to a technological platform. So for instance, in Pakistan, we're trying out this new thing around, it's a program that's been running globally for a very long time called TAL, Teaching at the Right Approach, basically a remedial education approach where you want to bring children who are left behind to grade level through targeted instruction. And something that we recently started trying out in Pakistan is that how can you do it in a hybrid fashion? So pieces of it are in person, but then there are other pieces of it that we are slowly transferring or shifting to technology, so that so basically so that we start moving in that direction. Like one of the speakers said earlier, not everything when shifted to technology is going to make much sense. I don't think we are going to in the short term. We have reached a point we're very far from the point where we are going to be able to have the kind of quality that is required from K to 12 to higher education that's completely online. I really don't think that's a possibility right now for the bulk of the kinds of schools that we have, for instance, in Pakistan. I think it definitely has to be, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I think for certain populations, yes, a technological solution is perhaps something that we have already, that we can make happen, and maybe maintain some sort of quality there. I think there will be populations where we need to try out a different approach, maybe a different technology, maybe a hybrid system. And then there was a research done last year in Pakistan. Malala Fund, I think, conducted that survey. And what we found out, and that survey was also done with households, so with parents and with children who were left out of school because the schools were closed for the bulk of last year. And the majority of the children and the majority of parents ended up saying that worksheets would be the best solution for us. So 95% of those, and it was supposed to be a representative survey, so 95% said that worksheets are going to work for us. So I guess, yes, we need to start transforming. I think we need to start moving in that direction, because this pandemic or this school closure was not the last time we encountered this problem. This is going to keep happening. We need to just have a short-term, medium-term, longer-term philosophy. We need to take practical steps. I think throwing money on the problem should not be, and a lot of time policymakers and politicians like to do that, because that's good optics. Give everyone a tablet, give everyone a free iPad, but those things do not always work. So I think crafting a smart solution, not taking too long doing that, but taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and saying that yes, it's an emergency, but it's an emergency to which the response has to be crafted really intelligently, and not because something is politically correct or not because something just looks good. And again, I'm sorry, I've been all over the place, and I'm trying to just make it more coherent and more focused, my response now. But I think coming to the point that I think even the definition of the term technology and what making technology accessible for everyone, I think needs to be thought through a bit more. I think we have a very rigid definition of that, and it should not be a tablet for everyone. And it should not be 5G for everyone. I think technology can mean a lot of things. It just has to work for that particular population. And in some cases, that technology was crafting good worksheets with good guides and making it available to people and providing them that support. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Dr. Isha. I will now move on to Mr. Anas and Mr. Vladimir. I also want us to be brief in our response so that we can give room for other panelists or the participants to give their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thanks for the question, Dr. Fauzia, and I think it's a very good question. You touched the most important things, which is concerning the data. And here, and I have to tell you, this is the big challenge what we have. This is a real challenge. We, as UNESCO, in headquarters, we conducted during the pandemic, we conducted the first survey on COVID, and its relation to the higher education systems globally. And we're analyzing now the effect of COVID-19 on higher education institutions, in also working on the second survey, which will be launched very soon, which will include also the elements of health, the elements of accessibility, elements of connectivity, etc., etc., etc. So I think this is is the agenda of UNESCO, and I have to again to say that data is issue. Data is issue because data is owned by such organizations, could be ministries, could be, but even for UNESCO, sometimes it's difficult to get the data, but we're looking for the real data, the up-to-date data. It's not only numbers, but we need really to get the real numbers, which we can, based on it, make an analysis and then make conclusions and policy advice. So thank you for this again. And I think another question, what you meant is the balance between the health and the financial part. And I think this is the big headache for any decision maker at the government level. We know during the pandemic, I think the decision is to invest more on health and keeping the education sector working well. So which first come and which the priority? And we always say that a safe and healthy return back to the school and to the universities is important and even very important. But also at the same time, we also insist to the government and the ministries of higher education or the education entirely to strengthen the financial resource mobilizations and also preserve the share of education as a top priority. And this is where we see the danger, because we don't like to see that the governments are in the future putting less money on education. We go more on the health, which is also true. But I think this is why we say that we need to solve this combination or this equation by keeping at least keeping the level of the budget on the situation we have during the COVID-19, not reducing it and down. And this is very important. Coming back to the students, how the students can be involved, and I think my advice or my personal thought is only way exists is through constructive dialogue between the ministries. And I think the dialogue and very constructive dialogue will be the alternative and will be the way to build those bridges and to be engaged. As Vladimir said, we're looking for the engagement. And I think this is a way where we can demand an engagement of students and teachers in the discussion with the decision makers. What is discussion? I think Dr. Aisha raising the situation related to devices to each student and to each learner and the technological aspects. I'm doubting that I can see that the technology will solve everything. And I think if we give a device to everyone, the e-learning problems will not be solved. We see, based on analyzing different experiences worldwide, the need is an e-learning ecosystem, which includes the learning, the teachers, technologies, connectivity, the well-being, digital literacy, and quality element. So I think technology and the human being and the regulators is a key in this ecosystem. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vladimir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. Well, the question I see it's twofold. You know, it's one side, you know, how you make policymakers to listen to you, and the other one was more about the well-being and you know, being part of the curriculum. Well, you need to understand that policy making is a mixture of three things. These are facts, politics, and values. So then you need to play with all of them. So your research is bringing facts, but I think that you need to work a little bit more, and this is why I was talking yesterday about the other sources of data. I think that what is striking me at the European level, but at the global level at the same time, is that, you know, we are all taking extremely seriously COVID pandemics. But the pandemics of mental diseases of young generation, we are simply ignoring. And we have the evidence. We know that in the past 10 years, depending on the country, there is a 15 to 25% increase of mental problems of young people below 24 years. And a double increase is for girls than for boys. So then we have huge problem ahead of us. And I think that your research and all what you have done, I think we should be somehow using, you should be using in convincing the policymakers. And then, as I said, you know, let's have a stronger evidence, but let's not underestimate the values. And you mentioned that in some countries, in some cultures, talking about mental problems is in a way very difficult, or it's very sensitive. So you need to somehow try to break those taboos. You need to play with the values in a society, because it's extremely, extremely dangerous to ignore this, because it can be too late to have solution. And then politics, that very often policymakers are reacting to media, are very much reacting to pressure from outside, etc. So then you need to use also this this part in a way that you are actually visualizing the problem. You are having more people, more influential people talking about it. And then, if you have the mixture of the three, there is a better guarantee that this is going to be listened to. And I'm sure that the organizations like UNESCO can be very useful, very instrumental. But even UNESCO cannot impose on the countries, on education system, almost anything. So, but this is, that's the combination where you need to be active and probably, and we can start in December in this global event with the policymakers, with ministers, but we need to think what needs to be done. And then curriculum. You're talking about the universities, and I would go below because these problems are starting already at the elementary school and secondary school. I think that this is where we need to build this psychological resilience into the young people. So I think this is very important. I don't know. It's for me, it's very instrumental. Do you know this story of Laurie Santos, from the professor from Yale University? And that's look at this story. If you go to YouTube and you find Laurie Santos, you will see her lectures, and she is very outspoken. She used to be dean at Yale, and what she said, that they, even at the Yale University, they found out that half of the students are having some mental problems. So which is shocking, young, healthy, wealthy, all what they need, and still more than half are having the problems. And she said, how I can help. So she started with a lecture and a course on well-being. And she thought that, okay, I will have 30, 40 students enrolling to my course. And finally, she got several hundreds. So then she had to go to the university theater to teach the course. And it became the most popular, her TED Talk became one of the most popular TED Talks. And she started with her podcast, which is called The Happiness Lab. And this podcast is I would say, the educational resource you can use and your friends can use. If you listen to those podcasts, you will understand a lot about well-being, and it's so practical that you know what you can do actually to improve. And I think that if you want to be very practical, this is very practical, because it's very difficult sometimes to convince universities, because they have their independence. You cannot impose curriculum on them, but we have to work in different ways. But I think it's absolutely crucial to deal with this. And it's just this number which I mentioned yesterday, this research from European Commission showing that in 2018 we had in the European Union 12% of population feeling lonely. And this year they published the second research, and it increased from 12 to 25%. So then 1/4 of population in the European Union feel lonely. And the loneliness, feeling lonely, is the prerequisite for being ill, being angry, and the open gate for mental problems in the future. So this is worrying, and I'm sure that if this loneliness issue would be looked at in different parts of the world, I would not be surprised that the results will be very, very similar. And so this is, and it doesn't mean that you know, it's Europe, and in Europe you have quite a huge cultural differences, and you have the Mediterranean countries which are very friendly, and the family plays the role, friends play, and you would be surprised that these are the countries with the highest, probably the highest percentage of lonely people. So it's you know, that is not that that, you know, this dry individualistic Europe is one big pot where the people are the same. Absolutely not. And I'm sure that if this research is done elsewhere, the results could be quite shocking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vladimir. I believe we have a question from Mohammed, or a remark from Mohammed. You may take the floor now. And I also see Professor Gina, so I can come right to you after Mohammed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria, for the opportunity. My name is Muhammad Babagana. I work with the Regional Center of Expertise, MENA, in Nigeria, on education for sustainability. It's an NGO that is recognized by United Nations University in Tokyo, Japan. I am also a volunteer with the youth as researchers under the Global Learning Team. So I am going to ask a straightforward question. Any of the panelists can be asked the question. So during our online survey, which were majorly the university teachers and the students, so we had reports from many of the respondents about poor student-teacher relationship and also poor teacher-student relationship. So in our recommendations, we recommended that universities design simulation of social interactions such as online learning hour, online lunch hour, ice-breaking activities, small group discussions to improve the situation. Now, for practical courses like medicine and architecture and all of those practical courses, do you think this recommendation will solve both the problem of improving relationships and also the quality of teaching in those courses? What other options will you suggest? Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's a brilliant question. I'm going to give the floor to Professor Gina to speak, and you may also answer Mohammed's question, or other panelists can respond. We have, just to let you all know, we have about 10 minutes.
Okay, I will not be taking long. It's just 2 minutes. Actually, I want to comment on the question of Fawzia, the effect of pandemic on mental health, and relate this to what Mr. Vladimir has been saying, that there are 20 to 25 increase in mental health problems, especially among girls rather than boys. Actually, attending the previous session, the session before this one, to the Arab State group survey, and they came out with a result that, from their research survey, that girls are not given the right for education after the pandemic due to the digitalization or some of such issues. When families came to choose what of their resources they would give to their boys or girls in regard of the digitalization, they preferred the boys because the situation was girls are not going to continue at a certain point. They will get married and have a house and children and so forth. So can this effect of being deprived the right from continuing education that was increased and was reported in a large percent, especially in developing countries in the Arab region, this be one reason why the mental health state or the psychological state of these girls have been affected tremendously during the previous year? I think those both researches and results from both researchers should be combined, and you should come out with a common understanding of what's going on, especially with girls during the pandemic and how their psychological mental health was affected. Coming back to Mohammed's question, and yes, this is a very important question, and it's very difficult to answer actually, Mohammed. I've been a teacher, I'm professor in the Faculty of Pharmacy, so yes, it's one of the practical faculties that needs hands-on activities, that needs the labs, and the practical sessions are even more important than the theoretical sessions. In the university, we got a sort of virtual labs, and we started virtual classes so that students would be able to see what's going on inside the labs through the computer programs and softwares and so forth. But yet, I'm sure that this would not give the same quality of education as you witness inside the lab, what's going on, the preparation, putting this to that chemical, what are the expected results, and you see it and you witness it. I think practical education, especially in cases of medicine, pharmacy, and engineering, would not be whatsoever solved by going to a digital era where virtual labs or anything like that could just substitute the practical and the practice of the students inside the labs. So I think your question is very important, but actually it's very difficult to answer, and it's very difficult to set a solid and concrete and reliable plan to substituting the practice of students in practical faculties with online activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gina. Would anyone like to react to Mohammed's question? I see Professor Aisha, Dr. Aisha, I will give you the floor now.
I'm so sorry, Victoria. I ended up hogging a lot of time before, but I'll try to be brief. I think it's a very pertinent question. I do want to address the psychosocial and the teaching question, both of them. I think the psychosocial issue is very, very, I think you raised all the pertinent points. Those are the kinds of things that we are hearing about in studies that come out of Pakistan too, and not just studies, but anecdotally also. There are things that we are starting to hear from children who are, in the family or friends of the family, and where we thought that this could never happen, these kinds of issues could never happen this close to home. We saw those kinds of, for instance, anecdotally speaking, there was a child at the middle school level, a close friend to the family, who attempted suicide, and the reason comes from a very privileged background, has access to everything, and had access to online education, had access to extracurricular when they could provide her, but then just the fact that she thought that the world is never going to be back to normal again. I mean, just that, thing that she had internalized somehow, that things have changed. We kept saying that things have changed forever. The world is never going to be resumed like, it was before, pre-COVID. Just that realization, and I don't know how she interpreted it in her own head and internalized it and never talked about it to anyone. And just one day decided that it's not worth living anymore. I should eat sleeping pills. I mean, thankfully, she recovered and all that. But I mean, it's those kinds of things, and you sometimes don't even realize unless those things happen to you, or unless they happen very close to home. So this is something that policymakers need to. I think this has come to the fore. I think you're right about the values. You're right about the culture. A lot of times, it's hard for people to self-identify as somebody who's having the problem. So I think raising that kind of awareness, that it's okay to talk about that. And I think the pandemic has given us that ability to do, because now we have numbers. Now there are more people who are coming out. So it's not a taboo anymore when you have more numbers behind the fact. There are certain things that the universities in Pakistan are trying to do. So there's a policy that they have come up with, that for every university they have to provide one counselor. Now what I fear about that is that in Pakistan we don't have many certified psychological counselors. So providing somebody who's untrained, providing somebody who is half-baked, I think it's, may end up causing more harm than solution to the problem. So I think long-term, we need to have more certified counselors placed in school, not just academic, but psychological. We need to have the same kinds of professionals placed in higher education. We need to have the same kind of professionals housed in workplaces. And I think with that, you're almost done with your time. So I'll just leave it here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aisha. Because we started a little bit late, I think we could extend for a couple more minutes, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time. I would like to see if any of the panelists or even Fauza or Smithry would like to react to Mohammed's question or to build upon the conversations that we are currently having. Fauzia, you may take the floor.
Thank you, everyone, the panelists who gave us the insights about the mental health situations in different contexts. Maybe in the global December meeting, we can reinstate together that mental health problem is a health problem, and we can have a combined approach for budgeting the mental health courses in different schools to universities as a health budget or as a combined budget both in health and education. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fauza. I would now like to ask for final remark from all of the panelists or any of the panelists if you prefer not to speak. As we bring this session to a close, if you could summarize your final remarks in 30 seconds to a minute. You could also use the raise hand function, so we have a little bit of order. Yes, Mr. Anas and Dr. Aisha.
Thank you. And I just I will speak loudly what I'm thinking about after listening to this valuable discussion. It brings me to value more and more the role of schools and of universities as a physical environment. So I think this is an opportunity to underline once more and once again that the role of schools or the universities is not only teaching and learning, but this is the aspect of the social life and making friends and even making husbands and wives that university people meet, and they can get married and they can find families, etc. But this is a space where we live and we learn how to live together. And I think this is important environment which we need all to work on saving it as safe as is possible. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anas. Dr. Aisha.
Very brief comment. I think one of the other panelists before touched very extensively on what it is that you can do to convince policymakers, be it more access to online education or to psychosocial and other kinds of support that are equally important. So yes, media and all of those things work. I think another thing that works is that so you come up with certain solutions that you come up with yourself. I mean, when you talk about, for example, very, very small example, in my daughter's school, they realized that a lot of children were feeling lonely. My daughter is the only child. She was feeling particularly lonely. And everyone's mental well-being was being affected beyond any doubt. So what they ended up doing without any school support, because everyone had access, came up with a well-being club. So anyone could log in twice a week, meet for an hour, and talk to each other about things. Anyone could join. I mean, so what is it that the youth, these kinds of tools and these kind of things are available to many, not to everyone, but to many. What are the kinds of models that you can show the policymaker and give them a solution that works for you? I think there are certain things that can be left to the policymakers, but then there are other things that you could very well do on your own on a very small scale, but gives a message that this is a real problem and you are desperate enough to bring a solution to the table, and you have tried things. I think the podcast is a very good example. I think building on that, not just hearing what others are recording, but maybe starting well-being clubs of your own in universities and schools. So that's one aspect.
Thanks, Dr. Aisha. Do we have any more final remarks before we close? Yes, Mr. Vladimir.
Just very briefly to thank you all for this very insightful and fruitful debate. First of all, many thanks to our young researchers. And well, I think that my concluding remark is that we have this technological gap, which is, I would say, easy fix. we have money, we find some good technologies, but we have much bigger problem, and that's the innovation in education. I think that we need to take the COVID experience as a nudge, as a good opportunity to change what we haven't been able to change in the past 20, 30 years, when all these issues were slowly bubbling under the surface. Now it exploded, we see it very clearly. And if we close our eyes and if we don't do anything, so that will be our full responsibility. So at the level as you mentioned, as I mentioned yesterday, students should take their own initiatives. Youth should be active and do whatever they can in their own circles. But obviously going up and up towards ministers and international organizations, the responsibility is much, much higher. And if we don't take this seriously, if we don't act, it will be our full responsibility towards the next generation. So I think that this is, for me, the urgency of this time is really to bring innovation and revolution to education, and focus mostly on the education of 21st century, not to be all the time rooted in 20th century, which was completely different one. So I think that's my takeaway from all this.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimir. Any final parting words before we close? In the absence of any, I would like to bring the session to a close. All of our panelists have shared great recommendations and ideas to drive us forward. And we've also heard from our two researchers, Fauzia and Smitri, on the work that they've done, and also posing important questions to our finalists. I just want to say that we have a rapporteur. All of the ideas that were generated from this event have been recorded, and we hope that they will be reflected at the global meeting in December. And if either of you are going to be present at this meeting, you really have a responsibility now to push forward the outcomes and recommendations from this event. Thank you once again, and have a lovely day, everybody.